Marcus Washington, a 73-year-old decorated Vietnam veteran, arrives at the prestigious Ocean View Resort for a long-awaited retirement vacation. What should have been a peaceful getaway quickly turns into a battle against discrimination when the resort's operations manager begins a campaign to make him feel unwelcome. As the harassment escalates, Marcus finds unexpected allies among longtime guests and sympathetic staff. But the greatest shock comes when he discovers the resort's troubled owner is someone from his military past, a young soldier whose life Marcus saved decades ago in Vietnam. Now, this distinguished veteran must draw on his lifetime of experience to expose corruption, confront prejudice, and transform a broken institution, proving that some battles choose us, even in our golden years. Did Marcus make the right decision by accepting a position on the advisory board? Like, comment, and share your thoughts on how veterans like Marcus continue serving their communities long after their military service ends. Marcus Washington adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his immaculately maintained 1985 Cadillac Seville. At 73, he still cut an impressive figure, his posture military straight despite the decades that had passed since his service in Vietnam. The silver at his temples contrasted with his dark skin, giving him a distinguished appearance that matched his careful manner. "This is it, Evelyn," he said softly, though his wife of 48 years had passed 3 months ago. The habit of speaking to her remained. "The Ocean View Resort, just like we always planned." The grand entrance of the resort loomed ahead, a sweeping circular driveway leading to a gleaming white colonial-style building with stately columns. Palm trees swayed in the gentle ocean breeze, and Marcus could smell salt air mingling with the scent of exotic flowers. This vacation was supposed to be their celebration, the culmination of decades of hard work and careful saving. After Evelyn's diagnosis, they'd accelerated their plans, but cancer moved faster. Marcus had almost canceled the trip entirely, but their daughter Lisa had insisted. "Mom would want you to go," she'd said. "You both dreamed about this place for years." Marcus pulled up to the entrance where a young valet approached. The boy's smile faltered slightly when Marcus stepped out of the car, but he quickly recovered. "Welcome to Ocean View Resort, sir," he said, his tone neutral but not warm. "Thank you, son," Marcus replied, handing over his keys. "Take good care of her. She's older than you are." Marcus retrieved his luggage, a single leather suitcase Evelyn had given him for their 40th anniversary, and made his way to the reception desk. The lobby was a testament to understated luxury: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and arrangements of fresh orchids. Several guests milled about, most of them white and dressed in resort casual attire that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly pension. At the reception desk, a young woman with straight blonde hair was helping an older couple. Marcus stood patiently waiting his turn, taking in the artwork on the walls, mostly seascapes and portraits of what he assumed were the resort's previous owners. When the couple moved away, Marcus stepped forward with a smile. "Good afternoon, reservation for Washington, Marcus Washington." The receptionist glanced up, her blue eyes giving him a quick assessment. "Do you have confirmation of your reservation, sir?" Marcus nodded, producing his phone where he'd saved the email. "Right here. 7 nights Ocean View Suite, paid in full 2 months ago." She examined the confirmation with visible surprise, then tapped at her computer. "Yes, I see it now. It's just that the Ocean View Suites are our premium accommodations." "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. "No, no problem," she replied quickly. "It's just that we don't usually," she caught herself. "It will just be a moment, Mr. Washington." As she continued typing, a tall man in his 40s approached the desk. He wore an expensive suit and a name tag that read Bradley Hammond, Operations Manager. "Is everything all right here, Jennifer?" he asked, his eyes flickering between the receptionist and Marcus. "Mr. Washington has a reservation for an ocean suite," she explained. Bradley's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. Well, unfortunately, we've had some maintenance issues with the ocean suites. I'm afraid we'll need to place you in one of our garden rooms instead," Marcus frowned. "My confirmation clearly states Ocean View, Mr. Hammond. My late wife and I specifically chose this resort for that feature. We've been planning this trip for years." "I understand, but these things happen," Bradley replied with a dismissive shrug. "The garden rooms are quite nice." Marcus stood his ground. "I'd like to speak with the manager, please." "I am the operations manager, Mr. Washington," Bradley replied, his tone cooling. "And I'm telling you that the ocean suites are unavailable." An older white couple approached the desk beside them. Jennifer immediately brightened. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, welcome back to Ocean View. Your ocean suite is ready for you." Marcus looked pointedly at Bradley, who had the grace to appear somewhat discomfited. "There must be some mistake," Marcus said quietly. "I believe you do have ocean suites available." Bradley lowered his voice. "Look, Mr. Washington, perhaps this isn't the right establishment for someone like you. There are other resorts down the coast that might be more suitable." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, not physical pain, but the restraint he'd practiced for decades when faced with such situations. He'd encountered men like Bradley throughout his life, from basic training in 1969 to boardrooms in the 1990s. I have a confirmed reservation which I paid for in full, Marcus stated firmly. I expect you to honor it. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and a tailored linen suit approached. She'd evidently been listening to the exchange. Excuse me, she said, extending her hand to Marcus. I'm Serena Collins, a regular guest here. Is there a problem? Before Marcus could respond, Bradley interjected. No problem at all, Ms. Collins. We're just explaining to Mr. Washington that his requested accommodation isn't available. Serena's sharp eyes moved between them. That's strange. I overheard you just assign the Thorntons an ocean suite. Bradley's smile tightened. The Thorntons are long-standing patrons. And this gentleman's money isn't as good as theirs? Serena asked pointedly. Bradley flushed. I'll need to check with the owner. Mr. Wilson has implemented new policies. Serena nodded. Yes, do check with Thomas. I'd be interested to hear his explanation. She turned to Marcus. Thomas Wilson took over the resort 6 months ago. Things have changed since then. Bradley retreated to an office behind the reception desk, leaving Marcus standing there with his suitcase. Thank you, Marcus said to Serena, but I don't want to cause trouble. Nonsense, Serena replied. I've been coming here for 20 years. This kind of behavior is new and unacceptable. Bradley returned moments later, his expression sour. We've located an available ocean suite, Mr. Washington. Jennifer will complete your check-in. As Marcus received his room key, he couldn't help but wonder what other challenges awaited him at the Ocean View Resort. He'd come seeking peace and memories of Evelyn. Instead, he'd found that even in retirement, some battles never ended. Serena handed him a business card. I'm hosting a small gathering on the terrace this evening. Please join us 7 p.m. I think you'll find some of the other guests more welcoming. Marcus pocketed the card with a nod of thanks. As he followed the bellhop to the elevator, he felt the weight of Bradley's stare on his back. Quite a place, isn't it? The bellhop commented as they rode up. Yes, Marcus replied thoughtfully. Quite a place indeed. The ocean suite exceeded Marcus's expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sweeping panorama of turquoise waters meeting azure sky. A spacious balcony offered the perfect spot to watch the sunset, something Evelyn would have loved. The furnishings were impeccable, a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a sitting area with plush chairs, and a marble bathroom featuring a walk-in shower and deep soaking tub. Your bags, Mr. Washington, the bellhop said, placing the leather suitcase on the luggage rack. Marcus tipped the young man generously. Thank you, I didn't catch your name. David, sir. The bellhop seemed surprised at being asked. Been working here 3 years now. Have you noticed changes since the new owner took over? Marcus asked casually. David glanced toward the door before answering. It's different now. Mr. Wilson isn't around much. Mr. Hammond runs things day to day. He hesitated. I should get back downstairs. After David left, Marcus unpacked methodically. He arranged Evelyn's photograph on the nightstand, her smile still radiant even in her final months. Quite the welcome we expected, he murmured to her image. At precisely 6:45 p.m., Marcus headed toward the terrace for Serena's gathering. He changed into a light blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, casual yet appropriate. As he crossed the main lobby, he noticed Bradley Hammond watching him from near the concierge desk, whispering to another staff member while glancing in his direction. Excuse me, Marcus said, approaching the concierge. Could you direct me to the South Terrace? The concierge, a middle-aged woman with a name tag reading Patricia, smiled politely. Of course, sir, through those doors and to your right. Ms. Collins's gatherings are quite popular. Thank you, Patricia. Marcus noted her professional demeanor, a marked contrast to his earlier reception. As Marcus followed her directions, Bradley intercepted him. Mr. Washington, I hope your accommodations are satisfactory. They are, thank you, Marcus replied evenly. I should inform you that the terrace event is a private function, Bradley continued. By invitation only. Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze. I have an invitation from Ms. Collins herself. Bradley's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, these gatherings are typically for our long-term patrons. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable dining in the main restaurant tonight. I appreciate your concern, Marcus replied, but I'll join Ms. Collins as planned. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Washington, I'm trying to save you some discomfort. The other guests might not be accustomed to your presence. Marcus squared his shoulders, a reflex from decades of facing down such thinly veiled prejudice. Mr. Hammond, I was navigating uncomfortable social situations before you were born. I spent 30 years in corporate banking after serving my country in Vietnam. I assure you I can handle a cocktail party. Bradley's expression hardened. As operations manager, I reserve the right to restrict access to certain areas of the resort. On what grounds? Marcus challenged. Security concerns, Bradley replied without hesitation. I see, and would these security concerns apply to any other 73-year-old guests or just those who look like me? The direct question made Bradley flush. That's not what I. Isn't it? Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I'd suggest you reconsider your position, Mr. Hammond. Discrimination based on race violates several laws I'm quite familiar with. Are you threatening legal action? Bradley's tone grew incredulous. I'm simply stating facts, Marcus replied. Now if you'll excuse me, I don't want to keep Ms. Collins waiting. Marcus continued toward the terrace, leaving Bradley seething behind him. He took a deep breath as he approached the gathering. 8 or 9 well-dressed guests stood chatting in small groups. The terrace overlooked the ocean, strings of warm lights creating an inviting atmosphere as the sun began its descent. Serena spotted him immediately. Marcus, I'm delighted you could join us. She approached with 2 flutes of champagne, handing one to him. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Marcus Washington, a new guest at Ocean View. The reactions were mixed. Some guests smiled politely, others seemed momentarily taken aback before adjusting their expressions. A silver-haired man with a generous smile stepped forward. Robert Langston, pleasure to meet you, Marcus. The pleasure's mine, Marcus replied, shaking his hand. Robert and his wife Barbara are practically institutions here, Serena explained. They've been coming to Ocean View every summer for 25 years. Even longer than you, Serena, Barbara added with a warm laugh. She turned to Marcus. We've seen this place through 4 different owners. This recent change has been quite the adjustment. As the conversation flowed, Marcus found himself welcomed by most of Serena's friends. They were curious about his career, his military service, and his reasons for choosing Ocean View. Evelyn, my late wife, read about this place in a travel magazine years ago, Marcus explained. We promised ourselves we'd come once we retired. The sympathetic murmurs at the mention of Evelyn's passing seemed genuine. Marcus was beginning to think Bradley's warnings had been entirely self-serving when a waiter approached with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The young man paled visibly upon seeing Marcus among the guests. Is something wrong? Serena asked the waiter. No, ma'am, he replied, but his hands trembled slightly as he offered the tray to Marcus. After the waiter departed, Robert leaned closer to Marcus. The staff seems jumpy these days, not like it used to be. I've noticed, Marcus replied. Mr. Hammond doesn't seem particularly welcoming to all guests. Serena lowered her voice. Bradley was hired by Thomas Wilson shortly after he purchased the resort. There's been significant staff turnover since then, and not for the better. What do you know about Wilson? Marcus asked. Not much, Barbara interjected. He's rarely here. Word is he has financial troubles. The resort was purchased with significant loans. Their conversation was interrupted when a staff member appeared at Marcus's elbow. Mr. Washington, there's an issue with your room that requires immediate attention. Marcus frowned. What kind of issue? A plumbing problem, sir. Your presence is requested. Serena looked suspicious. Can't maintenance handle it without him? I'm afraid not, ma'am. Mr. Hammond specifically requested Mr. Washington return to his room immediately. Marcus set down his champagne flute. It seems I'm needed elsewhere. Thank you for your hospitality, Serena. This is ridiculous, Serena protested. I'm coming with you. That won't be necessary, the staff member said quickly. I wasn't asking permission, Serena replied firmly. When they arrived at Marcus's suite, Bradley Hammond was waiting outside the door with 2 security guards. His expression was smug. Mr. Washington, we've received complaints about unauthorized items in your room. What items? Marcus demanded. We've been informed you brought alcohol into the resort without declaring it for our standard corkage fee. Marcus stared at him incredulously. I brought no such thing. We'll need to verify that, Bradley insisted. Resort policy allows us to inspect rooms when violations are reported. By whom? Serena demanded. Who reported this supposed violation? Bradley ignored her. Will you permit the inspection, Mr. Washington, or should we consider this a breach of our terms of service? Marcus felt a familiar anger rising, but decades of experience had taught him to channel it productively. You may inspect the room, Mr. Hammond, but be aware that I'll be documenting this encounter. He pulled out his phone and began recording. Bradley's confident expression faltered momentarily. Is this really necessary? Bradley asked, eyeing the phone. I believe it is, Marcus replied calmly. Please proceed with your inspection. The security guards looked uncomfortable as Bradley led them into the suite. They conducted a perfunctory search that yielded nothing. It seems there's been a misunderstanding, Bradley finally admitted. Indeed, Marcus agreed, still recording. A rather convenient misunderstanding that pulled me away from Ms. Collins's gathering. Bradley's eyes narrowed. You should understand, Mr. Washington, that Ocean View has standards. Not everyone fits in here. Serena gasped at the brazenness of the statement, but Marcus merely nodded, ensuring his phone captured every word. Thank you for clarifying your position, Mr. Hammond, he said quietly. I believe we understand each other perfectly now. The morning after the room inspection incident, Marcus rose with the sun. He performed his daily stretching routine, a habit maintained since military service, then stepped onto the balcony with a cup of coffee. The ocean stretched before him, its surface glimmering with early light. He checked his phone, reviewing the video from the previous evening. Bradley Hammond's words were unmistakable. Not everyone fits in here. Clear evidence of discriminatory intent that Marcus had encountered too many times throughout his life. After breakfast in his room, avoiding potential confrontations in the main dining area, Marcus decided to explore the resort grounds. The property was undeniably beautiful, 12 acres of meticulously landscaped gardens, 3 swimming pools, and a private beach. He walked the winding paths, noting how other guests reacted to his presence, some with polite nods, others with barely concealed surprise. At the main pool, Marcus found an unoccupied lounge chair and settled in with a book. He had just opened to his bookmarked page when a shadow fell across him. "This area is reserved," said a pool attendant, a young man with obvious discomfort in his expression. Marcus looked around at the numerous empty chairs. "There's no signage indicating a reservation." "It's a recent booking," the attendant stammered. "For the Johnson family." Marcus remained seated. "I see several available chairs nearby. When the Johnsons arrive, I'll be happy to relocate." The attendant shifted nervously. "Sir, I've been instructed." "By Mr. Hammond?" Marcus interrupted. The young man's silence confirmed Marcus's suspicion. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Kevin, sir." "Kevin, I understand you're following orders, but I'd like you to consider whether those orders are ethical or legal." Kevin glanced around anxiously. "I could lose my job, sir." Before Marcus could respond, Serena appeared with Robert and Barbara Langston. "Marcus, we were hoping to find you," Serena called out. "May we join you?" The pool attendant retreated hastily as Serena and the Langstons arranged themselves in adjacent chairs. "Having trouble with the staff?" Robert asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "It appears Mr. Hammond is determined to make my stay uncomfortable." "This is outrageous," Serena fumed. "The ocean view I've known for years would never tolerate such behavior." For the next hour, they chatted amicably, their presence effectively shielding Marcus from further interference. Several other guests from the previous evening's gathering stopped by, creating a protective bubble of sociability. The peaceful interlude ended when Bradley Hammond himself approached, accompanied by 2 security guards. "Mr. Washington," Bradley announced loudly, "there's been a complaint." The pool area fell silent as nearby guests turned to observe the confrontation. "What complaint?" Marcus asked calmly. "Another guest has reported feeling uncomfortable with your presence in this area." Serena stood up immediately. "That's absurd, Bradley. Who made this complaint?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose that information," Bradley replied stiffly. "However, as operations manager, I need to address all guest concerns." Marcus remained seated, his voice level. "And how exactly do you propose to address this particular concern, Mr. Hammond?" "We'd like you to relocate to our family pool area," Bradley stated. "It would be more appropriate." "More appropriate for whom?" Marcus challenged. "I'm a paying guest with full access to all resort amenities." "Sir, if you refuse to comply, I'll be forced to have security escort you to your room." The threat hung in the air. Several onlookers gasped at its brazenness. Marcus slowly stood, his military bearing evident. "Mr. Hammond, let me be extremely clear. I will not be moved because someone objects to my skin color. Any attempt to forcibly relocate me will result in immediate legal action against both you personally and this establishment." Bradley's face reddened. "You're causing a disturbance." "You're the one causing a disturbance," interrupted a woman in her 60s from a nearby lounge chair. "This gentleman was reading quietly until you arrived with guards, for heaven's sake." Other guests murmured in agreement. The public setting had transformed what Bradley likely intended as an intimidation tactic into a spectacle highlighting his prejudice. "This is your final warning," Bradley insisted, though his confidence was visibly wavering. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm recording this conversation, Mr. Hammond. Please proceed with whatever action you feel is appropriate, understanding it will be documented." Bradley faltered, clearly unprepared for Marcus's composed resistance and the growing audience of disapproving witnesses. "Everything okay here?" came a new voice. A tall woman in a resort uniform with a manager's badge approached. Her name tag read Sofia Rodriguez, Guest Relations Director. "Mr. Hammond," Sophia said, her tone professional but cold, "Mr. Wilson is calling from New York. He requires your immediate attention in the office." Bradley hesitated, clearly torn between continuing his confrontation and responding to the owner's summons. "This isn't finished," he muttered to Marcus before turning to leave, the security guards following awkwardly behind him. Sophia turned to Marcus with genuine concern. "Mr. Washington, I sincerely apologize for this incident. This is not how we treat guests at Ocean View." "It seems Mr. Hammond has a different perspective," Marcus observed. Mr. Hammond does not speak for all of us, Sophia replied firmly. Some of us have been trying to address these changes in policy since Mr. Wilson acquired the property. Serena stepped forward. Sophia, this has gone beyond poor service. This is blatant discrimination. I know, Sophia admitted quietly. And you're not the first to notice. Please, Mr. Washington, may I speak with you privately? Marcus glanced at Serena, who nodded encouragingly. Very well, Ms. Rodriguez, Marcus agreed. I believe we have much to discuss. Sophia Rodriguez led Marcus to a quiet corner of the resort's garden terrace. Palm fronds provided natural privacy as they settled at a small table overlooking the ocean. First, Mr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for your experience, Sophia began, her professional demeanor tinged with genuine concern. What's happened here is unacceptable. Marcus studied her carefully. How long have you worked at Ocean View, Ms. Rodriguez? 12 years. I started as a front desk clerk and worked my way up, she replied. The previous owner, Mr. Callahan, promoted me to guest relations director 5 years ago. And the new ownership has brought changes, Marcus observed. Sophia nodded, glancing around before lowering her voice. 6 months ago, Thomas Wilson purchased the resort through his company, Wilson Hospitality Group. He arrived with Bradley Hammond as his right-hand man. Within weeks, they'd replaced nearly 40% of our staff, primarily people of color. Marcus wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. Has anyone filed complaints? 3 former employees filed discrimination suits, Sophia confirmed. All were settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. I've documented everything I can, but as one of the few remaining senior staff members from the previous management, I'm walking a tightrope. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Because what happened today crossed a line, Sophia said firmly. And because Serena Collins said you spent your career in banking, we need someone who understands both discrimination law and finance. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You've been talking to Serena about me. After the incident last night, yes, Serena's been a vocal critic of the new management. She's mobilizing some of the long-term guests to pressure Mr. Wilson. As they spoke, Serena herself approached with a tablet in hand. Perfect timing. Sophia, has Bradley left for his meeting with Wilson? Yes, about 10 minutes ago, Sophia confirmed. Good, because Wilson isn't in New York. He's not even on the phone, Serena said triumphantly. That was a clever diversion. Sophia smiled slightly. Sometimes management meetings run long. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. After Sophia departed, Serena sat down and placed her tablet on the table. I've been doing some digging into Thomas Wilson and his company. She opened a document showing financial records and news articles. Wilson Hospitality Group purchased Ocean View and 2 other properties along the coast last year. All were acquired with significant leveraged financing from Atlantic Capital Partners. Marcus frowned. That's a high-risk strategy in the current market. Exactly, Serena nodded. And here's where it gets interesting. Atlantic Capital's regional director is Jeffrey Bennett, who happens to be Bradley Hammond's brother-in-law. Convenient, Marcus remarked, but not necessarily illegal. There's more, Serena continued. Look at the occupancy rates since Wilson took over. The data showed a 30% decline in bookings compared to the previous year. The resort is hemorrhaging money, Marcus observed. Yet they're actively alienating paying guests like me. Not just you, Serena corrected. Several longtime patrons have reported similar treatment, particularly guests of color or those who bring diverse companions. Marcus processed this information. It almost seems deliberate, as if they want the resort to fail. Which makes no business sense, Serena agreed. Unless failure serves another purpose, Marcus finished. Insurance fraud, property flipping, tax scheme, Serena nodded. I think we need to follow the money. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert Langston, who approached their table with evident agitation. Serena, Marcus, you need to see this, he said, holding out his phone. On the screen was an email from Ocean View Resort. Due to scheduling conflicts and maintenance requirements, we regret to inform you that your reservation has been canceled. A full refund will be processed within 3-5 business days. We apologize for any inconvenience. I just received this, Robert explained. After 25 years as a guest, they're canceling my stay 3 days after I publicly supported Marcus. Have you spoken to Sophia? Serena asked. I tried. She's suddenly unavailable, Robert replied. But the front desk confirmed the email is legitimate. Marcus's expression hardened. This isn't subtle anymore, it's retaliation. What should we do? Robert asked. Document everything, Marcus replied instantly. Every interaction, every email, every canceled reservation. I've started compiling evidence, Serena said, indicating her tablet, but we need more. Marcus thought carefully. We need access to the resort's financial records and occupancy data. And we need to understand Thomas Wilson's endgame. I might be able to help with that, came a new voice. They turned to see David, the bellhop who had assisted Marcus on his arrival. I overheard your conversation, David admitted. Mr. Wilson is arriving tomorrow for a private meeting with Mr. Hammond and some investors. They're meeting in the owner's residence on the North Point. How do you know this? Serena asked. I'm assigned to prepare the residence, David explained. And I need this job, my mother's medical bills. He broke off, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus nodded understandingly. We won't put your position at risk, David. Thank you, sir, David replied. There's something else. Before Mr. Hammond came, this was a good place to work. Now many of us are afraid every day. We'll get to the bottom of this, Marcus promised. After David departed, Serena looked at Marcus. We need more evidence before Wilson arrives. I agree, Marcus said. But we also need to be careful. Hammond clearly isn't above using security to intimidate guests. Then we'll need to be smarter than him, Serena declared. I think it's time to activate my network of concerned guests. And I believe, Marcus added thoughtfully, it's time I made a few calls to my former colleagues in banking regulation. Morning brought a flurry of activity to Ocean View Resort. Staff hurried about with renewed purpose, preparing for Thomas Wilson's arrival. Marcus observed the heightened energy from his balcony, sipping coffee and contemplating their next steps. His phone chimed with a text from Serena, meeting in my suite, 9 a.m. Bring your evidence. At precisely 9, Marcus knocked on Serena's door. She welcomed him into a spacious suite similar to his own but filled with documents, laptops, and several familiar faces from previous days. Robert and Barbara Langston were there, along with 3 other guests Marcus recognized from Serena's gathering. Thank you all for coming, Serena began. Before we start, let me introduce Patricia Alvarez, who recently retired as the county's civil rights attorney. A distinguished woman with silver-streaked black hair nodded. Serena called me yesterday. What's happening here is potentially actionable discrimination. Marcus shared his recordings and documentation of Hammond's behavior. Patricia confirmed their legal value while the others contributed their own experiences. Wilson arrives at noon, Serena announced. We need to understand his motivation before confronting him. Robert pulled up financial records on his laptop. I've analyzed the data Serena collected. Wilson Hospitality Group is overleveraged with $48 million in debt across 3 properties, with Ocean View as collateral for the others. That explains the cost-cutting, Barbara noted, but not the discrimination. It might if there's a buyer waiting in the wings, Marcus suggested. Someone who wants this property specifically, perhaps for redevelopment. The door opened as Sophia slipped in looking nervous. I can't stay long. Security is watching key staff members today. What have you discovered? Serena asked. Sophia placed a USB drive on the table. Financial reports Hammond doesn't know I can access. Wilson's meeting today isn't just with investors, it's with Coastal Heights Developments. Marcus's head snapped up. Coastal Heights, are you certain? Yes, Sophia confirmed. Why? Because I know them, Marcus said grimly. 20 years ago, as regional director at First National, I rejected their loan application for a Miami development. They had submitted fraudulent documentation and were planning to violate fair housing laws. The room fell silent as the implications settled. So there's history here, Patricia observed. Perhaps, Marcus acknowledged, though Wilson would have been quite young then. Serena connected the USB to her laptop. Wilson purchased this resort at a premium, $62 million, when comparable properties were selling for under $50 million. Marcus studied the financial statements carefully. These numbers don't add up. The resort is being deliberately mismanaged. Occupancy rates are dropping while fixed expenses remain high. Classic pattern for a distressed property sale, Patricia confirmed. Create financial pressure, then sell at a loss to a prearranged buyer. But why target certain guests? Barbara wondered. Demographic engineering, Patricia explained. Change the clientele profile to justify a different business model. A soft knock interrupted them. David entered cautiously, closing the door quickly behind him. Mr. Wilson has arrived early, he reported. He's meeting Hammond in the owner's residence now. Did you overhear anything? Serena asked. David nodded. Mr. Hammond was showing before and after photos of guests. He called it clientele transition, fewer minority guests, more affluent white patrons. The group exchanged troubled glances. There's something else, David continued hesitantly. Saw a military photograph in Mr. Wilson's briefcase when I was arranging his things. The name Wilson was visible, but the soldier was much younger. Could you recognize him now? Marcus asked. Maybe, David replied. He looked different, thinner in uniform. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through old photos before finding one from his Vietnam days. He showed a group picture to David. Was he in a photo like this? David studied it carefully. Yes, second row, third from left. Marcus stared at the young face David indicated, a skinny private named Thomas Wilson. Dear God, Marcus whispered. Echo Base 1970. What is it? Serena asked, concerned by his sudden pallor. Thomas Wilson was under my command in Vietnam, Marcus explained. We were stationed at Echo Base when it was nearly overrun. In the chaos, I pulled 3 men from a burning bunker. Was Wilson one of them? Robert asked. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes. He was badly injured but survived. Lost track of him after medevac. So the resort owner is someone whose life you saved? Barbara clarified. It appears so, Marcus confirmed, which makes his current behavior even more perplexing. Sophia checked her watch anxiously. I need to get back. What's our plan? Serena looked to Marcus. This connection changes things. Should we confront them directly? Marcus considered carefully. Not yet. First, I need to understand if Wilson recognizes me or if this is coincidental. David, can you get me into the owner's residence? The staff entrance isn't monitored, David confirmed. But what will you do? Something I learned in banking, Marcus replied with quiet determination. Sometimes the most valuable information comes from listening at the right moment. David escorted Marcus through the service corridors of Ocean View Resort, navigating past busy kitchen staff and maintenance workers. The owner's residence, a secluded villa on the resort's northern peninsula, remained hidden from most guests' view. The meeting room has a connecting supply closet, David explained in hushed tones. Staff use it to restock the bar without disturbing meetings. The vent system carries sound between rooms. Marcus nodded appreciatively. You know this place well. 3 years learning every corner, David replied. Here's the service entrance. The meeting started 15 minutes ago. The doorway led to a narrow hallway with staff-only access to various parts of the residence. Following David's directions, Marcus located the supply closet adjacent to the main meeting room. Positioning himself near the wall vent, Marcus could hear the conversation clearly. Projections look promising, a voice Marcus didn't recognize was saying. Once we acquire all 3 properties, Coastal Heights will have the contiguous beachfront needed for the development. The other 2 properties are secured, came Bradley Hammond's voice. Ocean View remains the challenge. Current valuation exceeds our target acquisition price by $13 million. That's why we implemented the transition strategy, responded a third voice, presumably Thomas Wilson. Declining occupancy rates and revenue should justify a major price reduction by quarter's end. The discrimination complaints pose a risk, cautioned the first speaker. If they escalate to a class action, the entire project could face regulatory scrutiny. Everything is documented as business decisions, Bradley asserted confidently. Clientele refinement, not discrimination. The staff changes were performance-based terminations. Speaking of complaints, Wilson interjected, what's the status of that older black guest? Hammond reported problems. Bradley's tone shifted to annoyance. Washington, he's become a complication, connected with Serena Collins and her crowd. I've applied escalating pressure, but he's documented everything. Name's Marcus Washington? Wilson asked, a strange note in his voice. Yes, former banker, Vietnam veteran, recently widowed. A chair scraped across the floor. Marcus could picture Wilson standing abruptly. Marcus Washington, Wilson repeated slowly, tall, military bearing, around 70. That's him, Bradley confirmed, sounding confused. What's wrong? Did you run a background check? Wilson demanded. Standard screening for problem guests, Bradley replied. Nothing significant except his former position at First National. Why? Because Wilson's voice had changed completely. That's the man who saved my life in Vietnam. Echo Base, 1970. Silence fell over the room. You never mentioned, Bradley began. It was over 50 years ago, Wilson cut him off. I was a scared kid caught in a firefight. Bunker took a direct hit. Lieutenant Washington pulled 3 of us out before it collapsed. He carried me half a mile to the medical tent with shrapnel in his own leg. Is this going to be a problem? Asked the Coastal Heights representative. It's already a problem, Wilson replied sharply. Hammond, you've been targeting a war hero who saved my life. What exactly have you done? Marcus listened as Bradley detailed the pressure campaign against him, the room reassignment attempt, the false inspection, the pool confrontation. Jesus Christ, Wilson muttered. All of this was happening while I was in New York. You authorized the demographic transition strategy, Bradley reminded him defensively. I authorized improving our revenue profile, not harassing war veterans, especially not this one, Wilson snapped. Show me the other guests you've targeted. Paper rustled as Bradley presumably provided documentation. This is what you've been doing, Wilson's voice rose. Canceling long-term guest reservations, staging complaints, creating hostile environments for minority guests. Your brother-in-law at Atlantic Capital approved the strategy, Bradley protested. He understood that Coastal Heights needed a certain demographic profile for the development plan. I didn't authorize discrimination, Hammond, Wilson insisted. Revenue management is one thing, this crosses every legal and ethical line. It's standard practice in property transition, the Coastal Heights representative interjected. Engineered demographics ensure premium pricing for the development. So you knew about this? Wilson demanded. Of course, came the smooth reply. Hammond has been our primary contact. He assured us you were fully informed. A heavy silence followed. I need to speak with Washington, Wilson finally said, and I need to understand exactly what's been happening at my resort. Thomas, Bradley's voice turned placating, you're overreacting. This is business. The development deal secures your financial future. Remember the loans. The loans you arranged through your brother-in-law, Wilson interrupted. The same loans that somehow ballooned from $30 million to $48 million during closing. I've been reviewing those documents, Hammond. The terms changed between what I approved and what was filed. Market adjustments, Bradley offered weakly. Fraud, Wilson corrected harshly. I may have been desperate for financing, but I'm not blind. You've been setting me up to fail, forcing a distress sale to your partners at Coastal Heights. The Coastal Heights representative cleared his throat. Mr. Wilson, perhaps we should reschedule. No, Wilson cut him off. This meeting is over, permanently. There will be no deal with Coastal Heights. You can't back out, the representative warned. Your financial situation. Watch me, Wilson replied coldly. Hammond, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the property. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Bradley warned. My brother-in-law can call those loans tomorrow. Let him try, Wilson responded. I've already contacted the Banking Commission about the irregularities in the loan documentation. I suspect they'll be very interested in Atlantic Capital's lending practices. Marcus heard movement, chairs scraping, papers shuffling, voices rising in argument. He slipped away from the vent and nodded to David, who had kept watch at the door. We need to go, David whispered. Security is moving this way. They retreated through the service corridor, emerging near the main pool area where Serena and the others waited anxiously. Well, Serena asked as they approached. The situation has changed dramatically, Marcus replied. Wilson just fired Hammond and canceled the Coastal Heights deal. What happened? Robert asked. Marcus explained what he'd overheard, including Wilson's recognition of their Vietnam connection. So Hammond was the architect of the discrimination campaign, Patricia observed. Working with Coastal Heights to devalue the property. And Wilson claims he didn't know the extent of it, Marcus added. Do you believe him? Serena asked skeptically. Before Marcus could answer, a resort security officer approached. Mr. Washington, the officer said politely. Mr. Wilson would like to speak with you. He's waiting in his office. Marcus followed the security officer to the administrative wing of the resort, his thoughts churning with what he'd overheard. Thomas Wilson's office occupied the corner position with panoramic ocean views, a space designed to impress. When Marcus entered, he found Wilson standing by the window. At 70, Wilson retained little resemblance to the frightened young private from Vietnam. Life had filled out his once thin frame, and success had given him the confident bearing of wealth and privilege. Yet as he turned to face Marcus, something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps even shame. Lieutenant Washington, Wilson said, extending his hand. It's been over 50 years. Marcus accepted the handshake. I'm retired from both the military and banking, Mr. Wilson, just Marcus will do. And I'm just Thomas today, Wilson replied, gesturing toward a seating area. Please sit. As they settled into leather chairs, Wilson studied Marcus intently. You probably don't remember me specifically. Echo Base had hundreds of soldiers. I remember pulling you and Privates Daniels and Rodriguez from the burning communications bunker, Marcus replied. You had shrapnel wounds to your right side and a concussion. Wilson looked genuinely surprised. You do remember. Some things stay with you, Marcus said simply. Wilson nodded, then sighed heavily. I owe you an explanation and an apology. What Hammond has been doing here. I didn't authorize the discrimination. I was focused on the financial aspects from New York, trying to salvage over-leveraged properties. Yet it happened under your ownership, Marcus observed. On a systematic scale. Yes, Wilson acknowledged. I gave Hammond operational control, a serious mistake. Why sell to Coastal Heights? Their reputation for discriminatory development practices is well documented. Wilson's expression tightened. Financial desperation. The 3 properties I acquired were meant to secure my legacy, but Hammond, working with his brother-in-law at Atlantic Capital, structured the deals with predatory terms. The loans are underwater. So you approved clientele refinement, Marcus pressed. I approved improving our revenue metrics, Wilson insisted. Not targeted harassment. I've been a fool, Marcus. Serena's voice suddenly came from the doorway. Yes, you have. She entered with Patricia, Robert, and Sophia behind her. Ms. Collins, Wilson acknowledged, rising. It seems we're having an expanded meeting. We're having a reckoning, Serena corrected. Have documented 43 instances of discrimination against guests and 27 against staff in the past 6 months. Patricia stepped forward. I'm Patricia Alvarez, former civil rights attorney. I've reviewed the evidence. The pattern constitutes actionable discrimination. Wilson didn't dispute this. I've fired Hammond. The Coastal Heights deal is dead. That's a start, Marcus said, but it doesn't address the harm already done. What do you propose? Wilson asked quietly. Marcus studied him thoughtfully. The man before him wasn't the hardened bigot Hammond had proven to be. Rather, he seemed like someone who had lost control of his own venture. Comprehensive reforms, Marcus suggested. Reinstate wrongfully terminated employees, formal apologies and compensation to affected guests, new anti-discrimination policies with regular audits. And management changes, Serena added firmly. Wilson nodded. I agree to all of it. But there's still the financial crisis Hammond created. Without the Coastal Heights deal, foreclosure looms. Marcus leaned forward. Thomas, I spent 30 years in banking. Let me see the complete financial picture. For the next hour, Wilson opened his files completely. The situation was dire but not hopeless. Hammond and Atlantic Capital had engineered financial distress through manipulated interest rates and hidden fees. With proper restructuring, the properties could be viable. You need to petition for loan restructuring based on fraud, Marcus advised. My former colleagues at the Regulatory Commission will be interested in Atlantic Capital's practices. I've already started that process, Wilson confirmed, but it will take time we may not have. Sophia, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. The staff would support you, Mr. Wilson. Many of us remember how Ocean View operated before Hammond. We could restore that standard of service. What about interim financing? Robert suggested. Several longtime guests might consider investing in a reformed Ocean View. Wilson looked surprised. After everything that's happened. Conditional on verified reforms, Serena clarified, with independent oversight. As they discussed possibilities, Marcus noticed a photograph on Wilson's desk, a military unit from Vietnam. He picked it up, finding himself and a young Wilson in the image. You kept this all these years? Marcus asked. Wilson nodded. You were one of the good ones, Lieutenant, treated everyone fairly regardless of background. I never forgot that. Yet you allowed Hammond to create the opposite environment here, Marcus observed. A failure I intend to correct, Wilson said firmly, starting now. Over the next week, Ocean View underwent dramatic changes. Hammond's discriminatory policies were dismantled. Staff members who had been terminated were invited back with back pay. Guests who had experienced discrimination received personal apologies and compensation. Wilson held a resort-wide meeting where he publicly acknowledged the failures under his ownership and committed to comprehensive reforms. Sophia was promoted to operations director, with Serena heading a newly formed guest relations council. On Marcus's final day at Ocean View, he sat with Wilson on the terrace where his confrontation with Hammond had occurred just days earlier. The Banking Commission has agreed to review the Atlantic Capital loans, Wilson informed him. Your contacts were invaluable. And the investor group? Marcus asked. Finalizing terms, Wilson confirmed. Robert and Serena have gathered surprising support. The resort should remain viable while we rebuild our reputation. Good, Marcus nodded. Evelyn would have appreciated seeing this place restored to what it should be. Wilson hesitated before asking, will you consider joining our advisory board? Your banking experience and moral compass would be invaluable. Marcus considered the offer, gazing out at the ocean. I came here seeking memories of Evelyn. Instead, I found a battle that needed fighting. And you fought it with dignity, Wilson observed, just like in Vietnam. Some battles choose us, Marcus replied. I'll serve on your board on one condition: establish a scholarship program for minority students in hospitality management. Consider it done, Wilson agreed immediately. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. He had come seeking peace but found purpose instead. Evelyn always said that retirement should be about more than just rest, Marcus reflected. It should be about making a difference with the wisdom you've earned. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Your wife sounds like a wise woman. She was, Marcus agreed, watching the waves. And somehow I think she knew exactly what I'd find here. Later that evening, a small gathering assembled on the beach. Serena, Robert, Barbara, Patricia, Sophia, David, and several other staff members who had weathered Hammond's regime. As they raised glasses in toast, Marcus felt a sense of completion. The battle against discrimination never truly ended, he knew. But in this corner of the world, on this day, justice had prevailed. And perhaps that was the most fitting memorial to Evelyn he could have created, not just remembering the past, but helping to shape a better future.